Universities across the Orion Spur teach one undeniable biological absolute: anything above zero point 0.5 standard gravity crushes complex life into extinction. Bones splinter, hearts fail, and evolution simply stops. It was a universally accepted fact, until a transfer student from a backwater death world sat in a xenobiology lecture and raised his hand. When the professor declared 1G environments entirely sterile, the human just tilted his head and asked the question that changed the galactic community forever. Then how am I not crushed? Fluorescent lights hummed a low, sterile note across the tiered seating of Amphitheater 4. Professor Alistair Corrin paced the center stage, his long, spindly legs carrying him with a graceful, almost drifting gait. Corrin belonged to a species that had evolved on a low-density garden world, resulting in a skeletal structure resembling spun glass. Like 90% of the sapient species in the Galactic Coalition, his people thrived in the standard 0.3 gravity of the station. Adam Howard hated 0.3 gravity. Sitting in the upper rows, Adam kept his boots firmly hooked under the metal rung of his desk. If he didn't, he constantly felt like he was pitching forward, hovering on the verge of floating away. Everything on the station felt wrong. The air was too thin, the doors opened too slowly, and the chairs felt like they were made of damp cardboard. He had spent the last 3 months carefully suppressing every instinct he possessed. If he pushed off a wall too hard, he dented it. If he grabbed a handrail too quickly, he warped the aluminum. He lived his life in a state of perpetual, agonizing restraint. Next to him, Celia Harper tapped her stylus against her datapad. Her slender, multi-jointed fingers moved in a blur of casual efficiency. Celia was brilliant, friendly, and physically so fragile that Adam was terrified of accidentally bumping into her. If he sneezed too hard, he felt reasonably certain he might break her collarbone. "Focus your attention on the planetary model before you—" Professor Corrin's voice echoed through the amphitheater, amplified by the acoustic dome. He gestured with a long, sweeping arm toward a massive holographic projection of a gas giant, which rapidly shrank down to a dense, rocky sphere. The great filter of biological evolution is not radiation. It is not atmospheric toxicity. It is gravity. Corrin tapped a command on his podium. The rocky sphere in the projection began to glow red. As planetary mass increases, the atmospheric pressure and gravitational pull rise exponentially. At 0.4 standard gravity, we see a plateau in complex sapient development. At 0.5, bone marrow struggles to produce red blood cells efficiently under the crushing pressure. The heart, any cardiopulmonary equivalent, simply cannot generate the hydrostatic force required to pump nutrients to an elevated brain casing. Adam frowned, leaning forward slightly. The metal desk groaned under his forearms. He quickly shifted his weight back. "Which brings us to the theoretical threshold." Corrin continued pacing to the other side of the hologram. At 0.6 standard gravity, the square cube law becomes a biological executioner. A creature scaled up to survive such mass would collapse under its own weight. Its joints would shatter from the kinetic force of a simple walking stride. Therefore, any world registering at 0.7 gravity or higher is classified as a dead zone. Rich in minerals perhaps, but entirely devoid of complex life. Corrin stopped letting the silence hang in the air for dramatic effect. He was a good lecturer. He knew how to hold a room. In a 1G environment, ladies and gentlemen, flesh is rendered down to paste. No species survives 1G gravity. It is a physical impossibility to exist in such a gravity well An organism would need a skeleton made of industrial-grade carbon-iron composite and a circulatory system functioning at pressures that would burst standard organic tissue like a punctured airlock. Adam stared at the holographic numbers floating above the podium. He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the thick cords of muscle there. He glanced at his datapad, then at Celia, who was diligently taking notes. Adam raised his hand. In a room of 200 students, the movement was sharp and jarring. Adam didn't raise his hand with the slow, drifting grace of the low-gravity natives. He shot his arm up the kinetic snap of his elbow, echoing faintly in the quiet room. Professor Corrin paused, looking up at the tiered seating. His large dark eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes, Mr. Howard, isn't it? The exchange student from the fringe systems?" "Yes, sir," Adam said. His voice was naturally deep, a low rumble that always sounded a bit too loud in the thin atmosphere of the station. "I have a question about the 0.6 threshold." "Go on." Corrin crossed his arms, leaning back on his heels. "You said 1G environments are completely sterile, that no complex life can survive, let alone develop sapience." Adam kept his tone respectful, though he was genuinely confused. "But Earth standard gravity is 1G, my homeworld, and we have billions of complex organisms. So, is your model accounting for dense calcium biology, or are you just talking about standard galactic physiology, EOB?" A ripple of quiet laughter drifted through the amphitheater. Celia looked at Adam, a sympathetic smile crossing her face. She leaned in close. "Adam, you're confusing your planetary classifications," she whispered. "Earth is probably a Class 3, not a Class 10. Professor Corrin offered a patronizing, gentle smile. "Mr. Howard, it is a common mistake for frontier colonies to miscalibrate their planetary metrics. The local measurement you call 1G is undoubtedly a localized scale. If your world were truly a galactic standard 1G, you would not be sitting here. You would be a puddle of biological fluid on the floor." "I'm not miscalibrating anything, Professor," Adam said, standing up. The chair squeaked in protest. He stepped out from the row, walking down the shallow steps toward the stage. "Galactic standard 1G is equal to an acceleration of 9.8 meters per second squared. That's Earth normal. We've been living in it for millions of years." Corrin's gentle smile faded, replaced by mild annoyance. "Mr. Howard, I am a xenobiologist with 4 decades of research. I have studied the crushed remains of deep space organisms that wandered too close to high-mass planets. You are currently standing in 0.3 gravity. If you were a creature born in 1G, the absence of crushing weight here would mean you possess a muscle density that would allow you to rip the doors off this lecture hall." Adam stopped at the edge of the stage. He looked at the heavy reinforced steel doors at the back of the room. He looked back at Corrin. He decided against making a point about the doors. "Professor, I wear a medical bracelet that restricts my movements. But my biology hasn't changed. I am not crushed. So how do you explain me?" Corrin let out a sharp, dismissive breath. "I explain you as a young man who does not understand the difference between local colloquialisms and hard astrophysics. But since you insist on derailing my lecture, we can put this to rest immediately." Corrin gestured toward the far end of the lecture stage. Embedded in the floor was a heavy circular platform surrounded by thick, transparent polymer shielding. It was a gravimetric isolation pad typically used for examining geological core samples from high-mass planets. It allowed researchers to simulate the immense pressures of heavy worlds to see how mineral structures held up. Step into the isolation chamber. Mr. Howard. Corin challenged his tone, dipping into absolute authority. The calibrator is linked directly to the station's main grav drive. I will set it to 0.6, double our current gravity. When your knees buckle and you cannot draw breath, I will turn it off. Perhaps experiencing the reality of heavy gravity will cure you of your planetary pride. Whispers broke out across the amphitheater. Celia stood up from her desk, her face pale. Professor Corin, that's dangerous, if he hasn't been properly acclimated. He claims to have been born in a full 1G environment. Miss Harper, Corin replied without looking away from Adam. A 0.6 load should be a pleasant walk in the park for him. Step inside, Mr. Howard. Adam didn't argue. Honestly, he was tired. His back ached from constantly holding himself upright without putting too much weight on anything. He walked over to the isolation pad and stepped through the gap in the polymer shielding. The floor beneath him was solid, reinforced titanium alloy. Ready? Corin asked, standing at the control console outside the shield. Actually, Professor, Adam said, rolling his shoulders. Can you just bump it straight to 1G 0.6 is going to feel like a low-orbit transit, and I get motion sickness. Corin's eyes flared with anger. As you wish. Medical teams are on standby. He slammed his hand down on the digital slider, pushing it rapidly up to the 1.0 mark. The amphitheater fell dead silent, the students leaning forward, expecting the human to crumple like crushed tin. The hum of the gravimetric projector beneath the stage built into a deep, vibrating roar. Inside the chamber, the artificial gravity field clamped down. Adam let out a long, shuddering sigh of absolute relief. His shoulders dropped 2 inches. The perpetual, agonizing tension in his spine evaporated. For 3 months he had been fighting the sensation of floating, forcing his muscles to restrain their own power. Now the heavy, comforting blanket of Earth's gravity pulled him down. His boots flattened firmly against the titanium floor. He didn't collapse. He didn't gasp for air. He just stood taller. Adam closed his eyes, rolled his neck, and let out a sharp breath. Crack. The sound of his cervical vertebrae popping echoed loudly through the chamber's audio feed. To the alien students, it sounded like a structural support beam snapping. Celia let out a small gasp, covering her mouth. Adam opened his eyes. He looked at his hands, clenching them into fists. The sluggish, disconnected feeling in his veins was gone. His heart, a muscular pump designed to push blood vertically against a relentless downward pull, finally had something to push against. The color returned to his face, a healthy, flushed tone that replaced the pale, motion-sick complexion he had worn for months. Professor, Adam said, his voice completely steady. He didn't sound strained. He sounded relaxed. Corin was staring at the biometric readouts on his console. His jaw was slack. The pad must be malfunctioning. The telemetry says you are under a full metric ton of atmospheric and gravimetric pressure. Your skeletal frame should be micro-fracturing. Bones are dense where I come from, Adam said. He decided to prove the point. Adam bent his knees slightly. The movement was smooth, completely devoid of the slow, careful caution he usually displayed. What are you doing? Corin whispered. Adam jumped. He didn't jump high, only about 2 feet off the ground, but in a 1G field, bringing a 190-pound mass back down required a massive dissipation of kinetic energy. Adam landed perfectly, bending his knees to absorb the shock. The impact of his heavy boots hitting the titanium floor sounded like a small explosive detonating. Thud. The shock wave transferred through the floorboards, rattling the polymer shielding. The acoustic feedback made several students in the front row flinch, throwing their hands over their sensitive ears. Corin staggered back from the console, staring at Adam as if a monster had just uncloaked in the middle of his classroom. Adam stepped out of the 1G field. The instant he crossed the threshold back into 0.3 gravity, he stumbled slightly, his body instantly overcompensating. He caught himself on the edge of the polymer shield. His fingers dented the high-grade casing, leaving a perfect impression of his grip in the material. He looked down at the dent, then up at the terrified face of his professor. "Sorry," Adam muttered, pulling his hand away. "Like I said, I have to hold back a lot, so does this mean I pass the midterm?" Corin couldn't speak. He just pointed a trembling finger at the door. "Medical," the professor managed to choke out. "We are going to the medical bay. Now." Dr. Simon Gable was not a man easily surprised. As the chief medical officer of the university's biology wing, he had seen appendages, severed exotic parasites extracted, and students who had accidentally ingested mildly radioactive cafeteria food. He was a sturdy, broad-shouldered individual by Galactic standards, hailing from a .45 colony world. He considered himself fairly robust. That illusion shattered the moment he pulled up Adam Howard's internal telemetry on the primary diagnostic screen. Adam sat on the edge of the bio bed, his legs dangling. The room was bathed in the sterile white light of the medical scanners. Professor Corin stood in the corner, his arms crossed tight over his chest, his eyes fixed on the massive monitor mounted on the wall. "This is a fabrication," Gable muttered, tapping the side of the monitor, as if physical percussion would fix the impossible data. "The scanner is uncalibrated, or you have some sort of subdermal metallic plating you failed to declare on your admissions forms, Mr. Howard." "No metal dock," Adam said, swinging his legs lightly. "Just bone muscle and a lot of water. That is exactly the problem." Gable snapped, zooming in on a cross-section of Adam's femur. The screen displayed a dense, brilliant white cylinder that practically glowed with density. "Your skeletal structure is solid. There is no honeycombing. Most sentient species possess an avian-style trabecular bone structure to reduce weight and allow for swift, energy-efficient movement. Your bones are essentially solid calcium phosphate pillars. The mass alone should make you too exhausted to lift your own arm." "It gets better," Corin said from the corner, his voice hollow. "Look at the musculature." Gable shifted the scan. His eyes widened. The red and pink striations of Adam's muscle tissue were packed together with a density that defied biological efficiency. "My God, the tension in these ligaments. It's like staring at the structural cables of an orbital elevator. If your muscles contract at full capacity, the torque generated would be enough to tear the limbs off a standard humanoid." "Yeah, I have to be careful when I shake hands," Adam admitted, rubbing the back of his neck again. "Usually, just do a nod. Saves on the apology letters." Gable ignored the joke. He was too captivated by the sheer, terrifying reality of the human machine. He moved the scanner up to Adam's chest cavity. The rhythmic, heavy thump, 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 thump of Adam's heartbeat played over the room's speakers. "This is a closed circulatory system?" Gable asked, horrified. Yes," Adam said, confused. Blood stays in the veins, unless I get cut. But the pressure, Gable's fingers flew across the console. He pulled up Adam's resting blood pressure. 120 over 80 millimeters of mercury. Do you have any idea what that means, Mr. Howard? Adam shrugged. Means I have a healthy heart, and I do my cardio. It means, Gable corrected, his voice trembling slightly, that your heart is an industrial pressure pump. The hydrostatic force required to push a thick, iron-rich fluid vertically up to your brain in a 1G environment is staggering. If I were to connect your circulatory system to a standard galactic citizen, the pressure would blow their arteries apart in less than 3 seconds. Your blood operates at a pressure that could run small, pneumatic machinery. Corin slowly walked over to the bio-bed, staring at Adam, as if the human were a loaded warhead sitting casually on the mattress. How did your species survive its own environment? Surely a fall from even a minor height would be fatal in a 1G well. The kinetic impact of a simple trip and fall. Oh, we fall all the time. Adam smiled, leaning back on his hands. Kids especially. They fall out of trees, fall off bikes. You just get back up. Our bones microfracture when put under stress, and then they heal back thicker. Wolf's Law. The more weight we carry, the stronger the skeleton gets. Gable stared at him. You break your own structural supports to make them stronger. Pretty much. Corin rubbed his temples. Mr. Howard, evolution favors efficiency. A species does not develop this level of sheer brute force durability unless the environment actively and continuously tries to destroy it. You are not a standard biological organism. You are a biological dreadnought. Earth is tough, Adam conceded. But it's home. You should see our apex predators. Bears, big cats. I'm actually pretty weak compared to them. Gable froze. He turned his head slowly to look at Adam. You are not the apex predator of your death world. In terms of physical strength, not even close. Adam laughed. A grizzly bear could rip my head off with one swipe. We won the evolutionary race because we could sweat to cool down, outrun things over long distances, and throw rocks really hard. Corin and Gable exchanged a look of profound existential dread. The galaxy had spent thousands of years charting the stars, cataloging life, and assuming that intelligence required a peaceful, gentle cradle to evolve. They believed that sapience was a delicate flower that could only bloom in the quiet, low-gravity safety of mild worlds. Instead, a death world had forged a species of highly pressurized, solid-boned endurance-hunting tanks and let them loose into the stars. Dr. Corin said quietly, not taking his eyes off Adam. I believe I need to rewrite the entire first-year syllabus. I think, Gable replied, staring at the terrifying rhythm of the human heart on the monitor. We need to rewrite the entire galactic threat assessment. Rumors on an orbital university spread faster than a hull breach. By the time Adam reached the central cafeteria for the midday meal cycle, he could feel the weight of 100 unblinking alien eyes tracking his every move. He kept his head down. He just wanted a sandwich. The cafeteria was a sprawling multi-tiered atrium, bathed in the soft synthetic sunlight of the station's agricultural reflectors. The air smelled of synthesized floral proteins and sweet ozone-tinged clean water. Most of the student body sat in clusters on delicate woven polymer chairs, eating brightly colored nutrient pastes, or sipping from narrow hydration tubes. They required very few calories. Their bodies didn't fight gravity, so their metabolisms functioned at a slow, peaceful hum. Adam's metabolism was a roaring furnace. His tray was loaded with 3 solid slabs of synthesized bovine protein, a massive mound of dense starch root, and a liter of heavily mineralized water. He carried it with one hand, his fingers effortlessly balancing the heavy ceramic-plated tray. He spotted an empty table near the large observation window and navigated through the crowded aisles. He stepped carefully. Every time his heavy boots touched the deck, he purposefully bled off the momentum, placing his foot down flat to avoid sending shock waves through the floorboards. Adam. He paused, looking over his shoulder. Celia Harper stood a few paces away. She held a small, clear pouch of green fluid. Her large, segmented eyes darted nervously between him and the tray he was holding. "Hey, Celia," Adam said, offering a tight, apologetic smile. "Sorry about the lecture hall. Didn't mean to cause a scene." She walked over her movements, possessing that characteristic low-gravity drift. Professor Corin canceled his afternoon seminars. The medical wing has classified your physiological data as restricted. People are saying you have cybernetic density implants. "Just calcium and a lot of red meat," Adam said. He gestured to the empty table with his chin. "You want to sit?" Celia hesitated, then nodded. They sat down. Adam was hyper-aware of the chair beneath him. The thin metal legs bowed slightly under his weight, whining in a high-pitched metallic protest before settling. He kept his feet flat on the floor, bearing a third of his own weight, just to spare the furniture. He picked up a protein slab and took a bite. Celia watched him chew. "You consume a terrifying amount of organic fuel," she observed softly. "My body burns it up, just keeping me warm and moving," Adam replied after swallowing. "Earth is cold and heavy. If I don't eat at least 3,000 calories a day here, I start losing muscle mass. And if I lose muscle mass, my skeleton starts to deteriorate." Celia leaned closer, her scientific curiosity overriding her apprehension. "Dr. Gable said your heart pumps fluid at immense pressures. If you were to sustain a laceration, I bleed, and then it clots. We have a protein called fibrin that seals the leak." "It seals itself," Celia whispered, shaking her head. "You are entirely self-repairing." Adam was about to explain the concept of scabs when a sharp grinding screech echoed across the atrium. 50 yards away, near the heavy loading bays that supplied the cafeteria kitchens, a repulsor lift drone was malfunctioning. The machine hovered 2 meters off the deck, ferrying a massive cylindrical vat of industrial coolant. The drone's starboard thruster whined, sparking violently. "Warning! Gyroscopic failure," the drone's automated voice droned. "Load unstable." The vat shifted. It was a solid titanium barrel, easily 2 meters tall. Adam's eyes locked onto the shifting cargo. He didn't know the exact mathematics of the container, but he knew mass when he saw it. Even in 0.3 gravity, the amount of fluid in that barrel meant it possessed immense inertia. Weight changes with gravity. Mass does not. If that barrel fell, it would hit the deck with the same kinetic devastation it would on Earth. Below the drone, a cluster of 4 avian-descended students from the Corvus sector were frozen in panic. Their fragile, hollow-boned wings flared out, but their low-gravity reflexes were simply too slow. The drone's thruster blew out with a sharp pop. The vat tipped over the edge of the lift. Adam moved. He didn't think about his restricted medical bracelet. He didn't think about blending in. He just saw falling mass and a group of kids who were about to be crushed. He kicked back off the floor. The woven polymer chair behind him violently snapped the metal legs, shearing off, as Adam's explosive leg drive propelled him forward. He crossed the 50 yards in less than 3 seconds. To the alien students, he was a sudden terrifying blur of denim and heavy boots. The vat plummeted. Adam slid the last 10 feet, the thick rubber soles of his boots burning against the deck plating, leaving 2 black streaks of melted polyurethane in his wake. He positioned himself directly under the shadow of the falling barrel. He planted his feet wide, bent his knees, and threw his arms up. Slam! The impact sounded like an artillery shell. Adam caught the titanium barrel across his forearms and chest. The sheer kinetic force of the falling mass drove him downward. His boots dented the floor plating. The reinforced titanium deck buckled under his heels, groaning loudly as Adam's body acted as a biological shock absorber. He gritted his teeth, his jaw locking tight. The tendons in his neck flared into thick, rigid cables. His heavy denim jacket stretched tight, the seams tearing at the shoulders as his deltoids and biceps engaged at maximum capacity. He didn't collapse. Adam halted the vat's downward trajectory a mere foot above the cowering Corvus students. He stood there holding a mass that weighed nearly 400 kilograms chest, heaving sweat instantly prickling at his brow. The entire cafeteria was dead silent. Adam looked down at the terrified avian students huddled between his legs. "Hey," he grunted, his voice tight with strain. "You guys might want to move." They scrambled away, their talons clicking frantically against the deck. Once they were clear, Adam didn't try to lift the vat back up. He simply shifted his hips and let gravity take over, guiding the massive barrel to the side. It hit the deck with a heavy metallic thud that shook the tables for 30 yards in every direction. Adam rolled his shoulders, exhaling a long breath. He rubbed his forearms. They were bruised a deep purplish red, blooming beneath his skin, but the bones were perfectly intact. He looked around. Every student drone and faculty member in the atrium was staring at him. Celia stood by their table, her datapad dropped entirely forgotten on the floor. Adam winced, looking down at the 2 deep boot-shaped craters he had just punched into the station's deck plating. "Man," he muttered to himself, "maintenance is going to kill me." By the end of the week, Adam Howard had been officially reclassified by the university administration. He was no longer considered a standard biological entity. He was legally designated as a Category 4 heavy environmental hazard. He was required to wear soft-soled shoes to prevent further damage to the floor plating. He was banned from using the standard elevators, relegated to the heavy-duty cargo lifts. The administration even installed a reinforced steel desk in the back of his classrooms so he wouldn't accidentally snap another chair. Adam hated it. He felt like a walking tank in a city made of glass. "You are sulking," Celia noted. They were walking through the lower botanical decks. The air here was thick and humid, filled with the scent of blooming bioluminescent flora. The botanical deck was housed in a massive transparent geodome jutting out from the side of the station, offering a spectacular view of the spinning star field outside. "I'm not sulking," Adam said, keeping his hands carefully tucked into his jacket pockets. "I'm just tired of people treating me like an unexploded bomb. Yesterday, a guy dropped his stylus in the hallway. I bent down to pick it up for him, and he actually shielded his face like I was going to throw it through his skull." "Can you blame them?" Celia asked, stopping to examine a cluster of glowing blue ferns. "You caught a 400-kilo industrial vat, Adam. The kinetic energy calculator in the physics department ran the numbers on your stunt in the cafeteria. The deceleration force you generated should have ripped your arms from their sockets. Instead, you just got a mild hematoma. You are terrifying. I was just trying to help. And you did. But you must understand, to us, you are a localized violation of physics. You are... A low, deep rumble interrupted her. Adam felt it before he heard it. The vibration traveled up through the soles of his boots. He stopped, his head snapping toward the far wall of the botanical dome. The station's proximity alarm shrieked to life. A blinding red emergency strobe bathed the greenery in a harsh pulsing light. Warning! The automated system blared its calm voice, a sharp contrast to the blaring sirens. Micrometeorite impact detected in Sector 4 Botanical Dome. Hull integrity compromised. Commencing emergency bulkhead lockdown. A sudden violent wind whipped through the dome. The air pressure dropped instantly, popping Adam's ears. Loose leaves and soil were sucked toward a spiderweb fracture in the transparent polymer wall 50 yards away. The crack was expanding. "Out!" Adam roared, grabbing Celia by the back of her uniform. He didn't pull hard. He knew he could dislocate her shoulder, but he guided her forcefully toward the main corridor. Students and researchers were panicking, their frail, low-gravity bodies struggling against the sudden gale-force wind, pulling them toward the breach. Adam planted his boots, ignoring the wind entirely. His mass kept him anchored. He grabbed a passing student by the arm, shoving them toward the exit, acting as a physical breakwater against the depressurization. Above the main corridor archway, massive emergency blast doors began to descend. Thick slabs of interlocking durasteel designed to seal off compromised sections of the station. "Keep moving," Adam yelled, ushering the last of the botanical staff through the archway. The blast door slammed down on the left side, locking into the floor with a heavy thud. But the right door, a 3-ton slab of solid metal, screeched violently. A section of the ceiling housing had warped from the station's sudden structural shift. The door dropped halfway and jammed, freezing in place with a sickening grind of metal on metal. The gap was 3 feet high. Air was howling through it, the pressure differential turning the corridor into a wind tunnel. "Warning! Bulkhead jam detected. Total pressure loss in 90 seconds, the automated voice announced. On the safe side of the corridor, security personnel rushed forward. 2 alien guards, clad in light security armor, grabbed the manual override handles at the bottom of the jammed door. They pulled, their boots slipping against the deck. The door didn't budge a millimeter. "It's stuck on the guide rail," one of the guards shouted over the roar of escaping air. "We need a hydraulic jack. Get the heavy lifters." "There's no time," Celia cried out, holding on to a handrail to keep from being pulled back toward the gap. "The dome is going to shatter." Adam was the last one left on the dome side of the door. The wind was whipping his hair wildly, tearing at his clothes. He looked at the cracked polymer wall of the dome. The spiderweb fractures were spreading rapidly, groaning under the vacuum of space. He looked at the jammed blast door. 3 tons of durasteel. "Adam, get under!" Celia screamed, reaching her hand out through the gap. "Crawl through." Adam walked to the door. He didn't crawl under. He crouched down, placing his hands flat under the heavy metal lip of the jammed door. He looked through the gap at the 2 security guards. "Let go of the handles," he ordered. "Student evacuate immediately," the guard yelled. "You can't—" "I said let go." Adam barked, his voice echoing with a deep primal resonance that cut straight through the howling wind. The guards backed away. Adam slid his boots apart, finding the grooves in the floor plating to ensure maximum traction. He kept his back perfectly straight, locking his spine. He rolled his shoulders back, his hands gripping the bottom edge of the durasteel slab. He closed his eyes. He stopped holding back. Adam engaged his legs. The human body as a leverage machine evolved to push upward against the relentless crushing gravity of Earth. His quadriceps, glutes, and calves fired in total unison. Grrrned, the metal shrieked. The massive blast door shuddered. Adam's boots drove into the deck. The reinforced titanium floor bowed inward beneath his feet, cratering under the immense localized pressure. The veins in his neck popped out thick and blue. He wasn't just fighting the 3-ton mass of the door, he was fighting the mechanical friction of the bent guide rail. "Come on!" Adam hissed through clenched teeth. He pulled upward, using his entire posterior chain. The heavy denim of his jacket tore straight down the back, the fabric unable to contain the sudden expansion of his latissimus dorsi. With a deafening crack, the warped guide rail snapped. Adam ripped the 3-ton door free of the jam. He held it suspended for a fraction of a second, his muscles burning with the effort, his skeleton bearing the unimaginable load without a single fracture. Then he threw his weight forward and slammed the door down. The durasteel slab hit the floor plating with a concussive boom, perfectly slotting into the locking mechanism. The heavy locking bolts fired with a loud clack. The howling wind instantly ceased. The corridor fell into absolute stunned silence. Adam stood up slowly. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, his breathing heavy but steady. He turned around, looking at the cracked polymer dome behind him, safely isolated from the rest of the station. On the other side of the blast door, a thick, reinforced glass observation window allowed Celia and the security guards to see in. They were staring at him, not with fear this time, with absolute, unadulterated awe. Adam stepped up to the glass. He leaned heavily against the durasteel door, tapping the window with his knuckles. "So," Adam called out, his voice muffled by the thick glass. "Who's got the keys to let me out?" Adam stood on the wrong side of the reinforced glass. On the safe side of the corridor, the security team was scrambling. One of the alien guards slammed his fists against the manual override console, but the display flashed a harsh, unforgiving red. The intercom crackled to life, mounted on the wall beside the blast door. Celia's voice punched through the static, breathless and sharp. "Adam, the locking bolt's engaged, but the guide rail is completely warped. The system thinks the door is structurally compromised. It triggered a hard mechanical lock. They can't open it from this side." "Then override it," Adam replied, his voice calm, though his heart hammered a heavy rhythmic beat against his ribs. "They're trying, but the maintenance crew needs to cut through the primary lock housing. It's going to take at least 10 minutes. Adam turned his back to the glass. He looked out at the botanical dome. The wind had stopped because the room was sealed, but the silence was far worse. Above him, the massive transparent polymer dome groaned. The spiderweb fractures were no longer creeping. They were sprinting. Thick, jagged white lines jagged across the curved ceiling, branching out like lightning strikes frozen in time. The micrometeorite had struck near the primary support strut, compromising the structural integrity of a 40-foot section of the hull. Beyond the cracking polymer, The infinite, uncaring black void of space waited. "I don't think I have 10 minutes, Celia," Adam said softly. "The atmospheric processors are trying to overpressurize the room to fight the leak." The security captain barked over the comms. He was a reptilian humanoid, his scales pale with stress. "But the structural integrity field is failing. Howard, if that glass shatters, you will be violently expelled into the vacuum. You need to anchor yourself. Find a maintenance harness. Tie yourself to a structural pillar." Adam didn't move toward a pillar. He stared at the center of the fracture network. If the dome blows, the sudden decompression is going to hit this blast door, Adam noted, walking slowly toward the center of the room. "I broke the guide rail. The door is locked in place, but it's sitting on a compromised track. If explosive decompression hits this door, will it hold?" Static hissed over the intercom for a long, agonizing second. "Captain," Adam demanded, his voice dropping into a low, commanding register. "Will this door hold?" "We don't know," the captain admitted, his voice tight. "The sheer atmospheric volume of the main corridor behind us. If the dome breaches, the vacuum might rip the door right out of its frame." Adam nodded. If the door failed, the corridor would decompress. Then the cafeteria. Hundreds of students, all of them possessing fragile, hollow-boned bodies, would be sucked out into the cold dark. "Right," Adam muttered. He cracked his knuckles. "Guess we patched the leak." He scanned the botanical deck. Rows of delicate alien flora grew in tiered hydroponic beds. The beds themselves were constructed of heavy-duty durasteel to prevent soil contamination. They were massive rectangular troughs, roughly 10 feet long and 4 feet wide, bolted securely to the floor plating. Adam walked over to the nearest trough. It was filled with damp soil and glowing blue ferns. He grabbed the rim of the trough with both hands. He planted his boots, ignoring the sudden, terrifying crack that echoed from the ceiling. A piece of polymer the size of a dinner plate gave way. The vacuum didn't suck. The high-pressure air inside the dome violently pushed its way out. A deafening shriek filled the room as atmosphere rushed through the hole. A localized tornado formed instantly, tearing the glowing ferns from their roots and launching them into the void. Adam gritted his teeth. He pulled. The thick steel bolts anchoring the hydroponic bed to the deck shrieked in protest. Adam engaged his core, his boots denting the floor as he applied a massive upward kinetic load. The sheer torque generated by his spine and legs was something no natural biological organism was meant to produce. The bolts sheared cleanly in half, firing off like bullets and ricocheting off the far walls. Adam hoisted the empty durasteel trough vertically. It weighed nearly 500 pounds. He held it in front of him like a massive rectangular riot shield. Above him, the dome gave way. A 4-foot section of the polymer shattered completely. The explosive decompression hit Adam like a physical blow. The air rapidly expanded in his lungs, and his ears popped with a sharp, agonizing stab of pain. The artificial gravity plating flickered, fighting the immense kinetic pull of the escaping atmosphere. Adam didn't anchor himself. He stepped into the storm. He moved against the gale-force wind, leaning his entire body weight forward. His heavy boots scraped across the deck, finding traction where there should have been none. He raised the massive steel trough, aligning the flat, solid bottom of the bed with the gaping breach in the dome. With a guttural roar, Adam slammed the steel plate over the hole. The impact of the steel trough against the polymer frame was deafening. The moment the metal covered the breach, the violent outflow of air stopped. But the vacuum of space didn't simply give up. The pressure differential between the remaining atmosphere inside the dome and the absolute zero-pressure void outside was astronomical. The void tried to pull the steel plate out into the stars. Adam was the only thing standing in the way. He locked his arms, keeping his elbows slightly bent to prevent his joints from snapping under the load. He wedged his back against a heavy structural support strut jutting out from the dome's framework. He became a human bridge, transferring the immense pulling force of the vacuum through his bones, down his spine, and into the station's solid architecture. "Adam!" Celia's voice screamed from the intercom across the room. It sounded incredibly faint. The air in the room was terribly thin now. Adam couldn't answer. He couldn't speak. He couldn't even hold his breath. He knew basic survival physics. If you hold your breath in a vacuum or a sudden depressurization event, your lungs rupture. The moment the dome blew, Adam had forced himself to exhale completely. His lungs were empty. His body was running entirely on the residual oxygen currently flowing through his bloodstream. For an alien from a low-gravity world, an empty lung environment meant unconsciousness in under 10 seconds, followed by rapid brain death. Adam was a human. His blood was thick with hemoglobin, pumped by a muscular engine that generated 120 millimeters of mercury at rest. His heart slammed against his ribs, beating at a frantic pounding rhythm, violently pushing oxygen-rich blood to his brain to keep the lights on. But the lack of air wasn't the only problem. Without the thick atmospheric barrier, the freezing temperature of the void immediately began to seep through the steel trough. The metal grew impossibly cold. Frost rapidly crystallized across the surface of the durasteel, creeping over Adam's hands. His fingers burned with agonizing, biting cold. The moisture on his skin froze instantly, fusing his palms to the metal trough. Hold the line, Adam told himself, his vision narrowing. Just hold the damn line. Through the reinforced glass of the blast door, 50 yards away, Celia and the security team stood in horrified silence. They watched the human pinned between the structural pillar and the makeshift steel patch. They could see the thick frost coating his jacket. They could see the violent, heavy thumping of his chest through his torn clothes as his heart desperately fought to keep him alive. "The structural integrity is holding," the security captain whispered, staring at his datapad in total disbelief. "The breach is sealed. He's actually holding it, but he has no oxygen. His core temperature is plummeting. He should be dead." "Get the maintenance drones outside," Celia shrieked, slamming her delicate hands against the glass. "Patch the hull from the exterior. Hurry." Adam's vision blurred. Black spots danced at the edges of his sight. His muscles burned with lactic acid, shaking under the impossible strain of bridging a hard vacuum. He could feel his skin blistering from the extreme cold. The steel was biting into his flesh, but his grip remained absolute. The evolutionary mandate of his species, the stubborn, deeply ingrained refusal to die, overrode his conscious brain. 40 seconds without oxygen. His legs began to tremble. The heavy boots that had cratered the floor were slowly sliding backward. He dug his heels in harder, his jaw clamped shut so tightly his teeth ground together. 60 seconds. The black spots merged, creating a tunnel of dark gray. He couldn't feel his hands anymore. The pain had faded into a dull, terrifying numbness. He focused solely on the mechanical rhythm of his heart. Thump, 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 thump. As long as it beat, he was alive. As long as he was alive, he wouldn't drop the metal. 80 seconds. Outside the dome, 3 automated maintenance drones swept down from the station's exterior hull. They hovered over the breach, deploying high-density, rapid-expanding polymer foam. The foam hit the edges of the steel trough, expanding instantly, locking the metal tightly to the polymer dome and completely sealing the vacuum leak. The pressure differential vanished in a split second. The immense pulling force ceased. Adam's arms buckled. Without the vacuum holding the heavy steel trough against him, gravity took over. The 500-pound trough dropped slamming heavily onto the deck. Adam collapsed. He fell forward, hitting the deck plating hard. Overhead, the atmospheric processors kicked into overdrive. Thick, rich, warm oxygen flooded into the room, roaring through the vents. Adam lay on the floor, his body completely limp. His lungs convulsed, expanding violently as they sucked in the fresh air. He let out a harsh, ragged gasp, rolling onto his side. He coughed a deep, rattling sound that shook his chest. Across the room, the grinding sparks of plasma cutters finally breached the jammed manual lock of the blast door. The heavy Durasteel slab was wrenched open, and medical personnel flooded the dome, their low-gravity bodies drifting rapidly toward him. Dr. Gable was the first to reach him. The large, broad-shouldered medical officer dropped to his knees, immediately pressing a bioscanner to Adam's neck. "Blood pressure is massive," Gable shouted over the hissing vents, his eyes wide with panic. "Pulse is erratic. Severe hypothermic shock to the upper extremities." Adam blinked slowly, the harsh emergency lighting burning his retinas. He felt a sharp sting in his arm as Gable injected a warm synthetic plasma stimulant into his veins. The numbness in his hands was immediately replaced by a burning, agonizing throb as blood rushed back into his frozen tissues. "You're alive," Gable muttered, looking down at Adam as if looking at a ghost. "You held a mechanical patch against an active vacuum breach for 84 seconds, in sub-zero temperatures, with 0 atmospheric oxygen. Your heart should have exploded. Your brain should be starved of tissue." Adam let his head fall back against the cold deck plating. He stared up at the temporary foam patch sealing the massive hole in the ceiling. He took another deep, shuddering breath. It tasted like ozone and copper, but it was the best thing he had ever tasted. "I told you, Doc," Adam rasped, his voice sounding like cracked glass. He managed a weak, exhausted smile. "We fall out of trees, we get back up." Professor Corrin stepped through the crowd of medical staff, his slender frame shaking as he looked from the heavy steel trough to the young human lying on the floor. The professor looked down at his own hands, then back at Adam. "No species survives a 1G environment." Corrin quoted his own lecture, his voice barely a whisper. He shook his head slowly. "I was a fool. It is not that you survive it, Mr. Howard. It is that surviving it made you incapable of yielding to anything else." Recovery was not a graceful process. Adam lay in the primary intensive care ward for 3 days. The medical wing of the station was designed for the delicate low-impact injuries common to low-gravity species. Minor fractures, mild radiation exposure, or the occasional synthetic nutrient allergic reaction. It was not equipped to handle a hyperdense primate who had voluntarily wrestled with a hard vacuum. Dr. Gable practically moved his office into Adam's recovery suite. The medical officer treated the human's healing process less like a biological recovery and more like observing a heavy industrial forge repairing itself. Adam's hands were encased in thick, gelatinous thermal sleeves. The extreme cold of the void had flash-frozen the dermal layers of his palms and fingers, causing severe frostbite. Under normal galactic medical protocols, necrotic tissue from hard vacuum exposure resulted in immediate amputation and synthetic replacement. The alien physiology simply could not regenerate cellular structures destroyed by absolute zero. Adam's body, however, refused to surrender the tissue. His massive circulatory system went to war. His heart pumped relentless high-pressure waves of hot, nutrient-dense blood into the damaged extremities. The capillaries in his hands, which had contracted violently to preserve core heat during the exposure, now dilated. The sheer volume of blood flow turned his hands a deep, angry crimson beneath the thermal gel. The dead outer layers of skin began to peel away, pushed out by the aggressive, rapid generation of new cells beneath. "Your caloric burn rate is terrifying," Gable muttered on the second day, tapping frantically at the biomonitor beside the bed. "Your basal metabolic rate has quadrupled. You are consuming energy at a pace that would starve a standard patient in hours." "Takes a lot of fuel to rebuild the engine, Doc," Adam rasped. His throat was still raw from the explosive decompression. He shifted on the bio-bed, wincing as the thick muscle groups in his back flared with dull, heavy pain. "You tore the latissimus dorsi on your left side," Gable noted, adjusting the holographic scan hovering over Adam's chest. "You also sustained 52 distinct microfractures in your spinal column when you anchored yourself against the hull. The shear force applied to your vertebrae was catastrophic." "They'll heal thicker," Adam said quietly, staring up at the sterile white ceiling. "Wolf's Law. Remember," Gable paused, his hands resting on the console edge. He looked at the bruised, battered human. The sheer violence of Adam's physiology was appalling, but the resilience was undeniable. "I am beginning to understand that your species treats catastrophic trauma as a mere suggestion for structural improvement. I had to requisition 400 kilograms of synthesized bovine protein just to keep your body from cannibalizing its own muscle mass. The kitchen drones are working overtime." The heavy sliding doors to the medical suite hissed open. Celia stepped inside, carrying a massive thermal container. She moved with her usual low-gravity grace, but her large eyes were entirely focused on Adam. She set the container down on the reinforced bedside table with a heavy thud. "I brought the high-density starch roots," she said, her voice soft, "and the heavily mineralized water. The cafeteria staff made sure to add the extra sodium chloride you requested." "Thanks, Celia," Adam offered a tired, genuine smile. "I owe you one." "You owe me nothing," she replied, firmly, pulling up a chair and sitting a safe distance from the bed. The structural engineers finished their assessment of the botanical dome. The polymer foam held, but the maintenance crews had to replace the entire 40-foot section. The chief engineer found the sheared bolts from the hydroponic trough. Adam groaned, letting his head fall back into the pillow. "Let me guess, they're billing me for the damages." "No," Celia said. She leaned forward, resting her delicate chin on her hands. "They mounted the sheared bolts in the engineering faculty lounge. The security captain submitted his official report to the station commander. He explicitly stated that standard emergency protocols failed and that a single human student acted as a localized biological bulkhead." Adam didn't know what to say to that. He looked at his bandaged hands. The throbbing pain was a constant rhythmic reminder of how close he had come to the edge. He wasn't invincible. The cold had hurt. The vacuum had terrified him. He had just been too stubborn to let go. Professor Corrin entered the room a moment later. The tall, spindly academic looked older than he had a week ago. His posture, usually straight and proud, carried a slight weary slump. He stood at the foot of the bed, his dark eyes studying Adam with a profound, quiet intensity. "Mr. Howard," Corrin began, his voice lacking its usual theatrical projection. "I have spent the last 3 days reviewing the telemetry data Dr. Gable recorded during the hull breach." "Am I still expelled for breaking the door?" Adam asked dryly. Corrin didn't smile. "To survive in the void for 84 seconds, your brain engaged a severe biological lockdown. It prioritized oxygen flow to the vital organs, intentionally sacrificing the peripheral tissues to buy you time. You experienced the onset of cellular death, immense physical trauma, and agonizing thermal shock. Yeah, it sucked, and yet you did not drop the shield." Corrin gripped the edge of the biobed. Any other creature in this galaxy, upon feeling the agony of hard vacuum, would have entered a state of involuntary shock. Their nervous system would have collapsed to spare them the pain. They would have dropped the metal. You did not. Your nervous system processed the pain, acknowledged the catastrophic damage, and your brain simply commanded your muscles to ignore it. "If I dropped it, the corridor would have decompressed," Adam stated simply. "People would have died. Pain is temporary. Dead is permanent. We learned that pretty early on Earth." Corrin slowly shook his head. "I taught my students that gravity is the great filter. I taught them that heavy mass crushes the potential for sapient greatness, turning life into brutal, mindless machinery." The professor stepped back, offering Adam a deep, formal bow, a gesture of absolute respect rarely seen outside of the high councils. "I was entirely wrong," Corrin said softly. "Gravity did not crush your potential, Adam. It forged it. Your world did not make you a monster. It simply ensured that when the sky shattered and the void reached out to claim us, you would have the strength to stand in the gap." 2 weeks later, the hum of Amphitheater 4 felt exactly the same, yet the atmosphere had irrevocably shifted. Adam walked down the tiered steps. He still wore his heavy boots, and he still moved with deliberate, careful steps, bleeding off his momentum. But the students in the hall no longer shrank back when he passed. The fearful whispers had vanished. Instead, there was space. They gave him room not out of terror that he might break them, but out of a quiet, unspoken reverence. The avian students from the Corvus sector clicked their beaks in respectful greeting. The reptilian biology majors nodded deferentially. Adam reached his designated spot at the back of the room. The administration had kept the heavy reinforced steel desk, but someone had draped a soft woven cushion over the rigid metal chair. A small, anonymous gesture of hospitality. He sat down, placing his datapad on the desk. His hands were out of the thermal sleeves, though the skin on his palms remained a bright, raw pink, completely devoid of calluses. The new tissue was sensitive, forcing him to grip his stylus with extreme care. Celia took her seat at the desk beside him. She glanced at his hands. "The dermal regeneration looks complete," she observed quietly. "Gable says I have the cellular turnover rate of a cancer cell." Adam chuckled, tapping a command on his pad. "I think that was a compliment. Mostly it just itches." Down on the main stage, Professor Corrin walked to the podium. He did not pace. He stood firmly behind the console, looking up at the 200 students. His eyes briefly met Adam's before he tapped the main holographic projector. The massive projection of the standard gas giant and rocky sphere did not appear. Instead, the projector hummed, rendering a spectacularly detailed high-resolution image of a blue and green marble. Swirling white atmospheric clouds covered massive oceans. Thick, dense land masses dominated the surface. Focus your attention on the planetary model before you... Corrin's voice echoed through the amphitheater. The tone was steady, carrying a new weight. Classification Deathworld. Local designation Earth. Adam leaned forward, slightly resting his forearms on the cool steel of his desk. For generations, standard xenobiology has operated on a strict paradigm. Corrin lectured, gesturing toward the blue planet. We believed that the conditions required for the development of higher intelligence were narrow. We believed that peace, environmental stability, and low gravimetric pressure were the absolute prerequisites for a civilized mind. Corrin tapped the console. The holographic data beside Earth expanded, showing terrifying numbers. Gravity 9.8 meters per second squared. Atmospheric pressure 101.3 kilopascals. Extreme temperature variances. Violent tectonic instability. Earth defies this paradigm. It is a world of crushing mass violent weather and ruthless predatory competition. By all our traditional metrics, life here should never have achieved spaceflight. It should have been trapped forever in a cycle of brutal, localized survival. The professor walked slowly around the hologram. But we failed to account for the inverse reaction of biological stress. When an environment demands physical perfection merely to stand upright, the species that conquers that environment does not just survive. It adapts. It overcompensates. It builds bone that rivals industrial steel and a circulatory system that defies hydrostatic limits. Celia was diligently taking notes, her multi-jointed fingers flying across her screen. All around, Adam's students stared at the data with rapt attention. However, Corrin continued, his voice dropping into a solemn register, the true marvel of Earth is not its gravity. It is the psychological evolution required to endure it. A species born in a 1G gravity well cannot afford to be fragile, but more importantly, it cannot afford to yield. The physical strength of humanity is a direct result of their atmospheric pressure. Their courage, however, is a direct result of their choice. Corrin stopped pacing. He looked directly at the upper rows. We do not study humanity to learn how to break limits, Corrin concluded. We study humanity to understand what happens when a species simply refuses to acknowledge that limits exist. Class dismissed. The low hum of the amphitheater returned as students began packing up their data pads. Adam sat quietly for a moment, looking at the glowing blue hologram of his home. It looked so peaceful from a distance. Celia stood up, sliding her pad into her satchel. "Are you heading to the cafeteria?" she asked. "I believe they synthesized another batch of the high-density proteins for you." Adam smiled carefully, picking up his own pad with his sensitive, newly healed hands. He stood up, ensuring his boots stayed flat on the deck plating. He felt the heavy pulling ache in his back muscles, a lingering ghost of the vacuum, but it didn't bother him. It was just a reminder that he was still standing. "Yeah," Adam said, his deep voice carrying a relaxed, easy warmth. "Let's go get lunch, but I'm staying away from the loading bays today. If something falls, let gravity handle it." Celia laughed a soft, musical sound in the thin air of the station. Together, they walked up the tiered steps, the heavy, deliberate thud of human boots echoing alongside the light drifting steps of the stars. Adam Howard hated point 3 gravity, but as he looked around the station, he realized he didn't mind the people who lived in it. They were fragile, yes, but that just meant they needed a little heavy lifting every now and then. If you enjoyed this journey into the sheer, unstoppable resilience of the human spirit, don't just keep it to yourself. Hit that like button to feed the algorithm, share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories from across the cosmos. Your support is the gravity that keeps this channel grounded and growing. Drop a comment below what high-gravity human feat should we explore next. Let me know, and I'll see you in the next transmission.